I kind of thought I was on speaker view, but I'm not. Let's try that again. Tell you what I'll do. I'll just pin myself. That's easier. Right. Yes, apologies to those of you who were here last week. And if you watched the recording, you'll have seen that we had a sort of celebrity squares array. And I realised I'd forgotten to switch to the appropriate view for the recording. So if you're worrying about that, then this one we won't be able to see you. So nice to see you all back again. I'm hopeful that we might have a few more people joining us, but you never know because people have busy lives, don't they? And before I get started, if you haven't already done so, if you would like to have a weekly reminder of when these events are, because I am planning to keep doing it every week, until either you get bored with it or I get bored with it. So if you'd like to have a weekly reminder, you can sign up for that on the page leadershipforlunch.com. And I've got my lovely Magic Mary helping me out in the background today. So Mary's going to put various links into the chat for you. So there's the first one. So if you'd like to have a weekly reminder that tells you, I think comes out on a Friday to tell you what the topic is for the following week. And then you'll also get a message at 1 o'clock on Tuesday to say we're starting very soon. So that'll save you having to keep remembering about it. So today's topic is about neuroscience. And I'm going to share with you a bit of neuroscience that I think can be used to make leadership really simple. That's simple, not necessarily easy. But it struck me some time ago that, I have a model of leadership. Lots of other people have come up with models, and it's very easy to get overwhelmed with all the different aspects that you could consider in your quest to be the best leader that you can be. And then I came across this bit of neuroscience and I thought, well, for those people who just like a single lens through which to view their leadership role, this might be it. This might just make things simple for you. And so before I go into that, I do also, somebody who's not actually here, but may join us at some point, said to me, Diane, why are you doing this? Why are you giving free leadership sessions? And the simple answer is because I think it matters. And because there are too many people who have positions of responsibility in large organizations who are under a lot of pressure to deliver and don't get enough time to think about how do I become a better leader, and don't necessarily have the budget, and the organization doesn't have the infrastructure to train people in all of these different skills. So it's just my way of contributing a little bit. Throughout my career, people have been generous with me. They've helped me a lot. And I've arrived at a stage in my life where I feel like it's important not to sit on my knowledge, and to share it around a bit. And also, the other thing I was going to say, if you would like to have a telephone call with me to talk about your leadership skills, talk about your situation, then you can book a call with me, and Mary will put the link to that into the chat box as well. Oh, I see Kieran's joining us, Karen. That's nice. I presume it was you that told him.
Yes, and he's in a different part of the building, so it's
Right,
fine.
okay. Good afternoon, Kieran. Nice to have you on board. And those of you that were wondering, no, it's not an accident that Karen and Kieran have the same surname. So yes, if you'd like to book a call with me to talk about your leadership situation, about your team, or anything else that you think it would be good to have a chat about, then there is also a link in the chat box where you can sign up. So let's get started on the neuroscience. I'm going to share my screen with you because I've got some slides here. And if you could just give me a thumbs up when that's visible. Excellent. Thank you. Good. Okay. Don't really need the title slide, do we? But I'm in the habit of doing one. Okay. So there's this thing that's known to neuroscientists as the primary organizing principle of the brain. So it's basically, what's your brain there to do? This is what it's there to do. It's to ensure that you survive. That is its number one priority. And the way that it ensures you survive is by doing two things. One is to minimize threat, and the other is to maximize reward. Now, if we go all the way back to our primitive ancestors, back when we kind of, lived in tribes in caves and all the rest of it, then examples of threat would be things like predators, would be bad weather, would be, sorry, can you still see that? I've just clicked the wrong thing there. Yes. So the examples of threat would be things like predators, bad weather, lack of food, hostile other groups of people, other opposing tribes and that kind of thing. And examples of reward would be things like food and shelter and friendly people. And basically, our brains have evolved to respond differently depending on whether we perceive there to be threat or reward in the environment. So in this slide, you can see exactly what happens in your brain depending on whether you're perceiving threat or reward. So in threat mode, what happens is that your working memory, it reduces, it virtually shuts down actually. Your field of view narrows, so your peripheral vision shuts down, and you will get a generalized sense of threat, which leads to greater pessimism. Now, if we go all the way back to those primitive ancestors, imagine you're walking through the forest and you realize there's a wolf following you. Okay? So the most important thing at that point is to get away from the wolf. So your working memory shuts down. We don't really need to remember any of this. We just need to focus on getting away from the predator. Your field of view shuts down, so your peripheral vision disappears and you focus so that you can just see the path ahead and run like crazy. So you don't want to be distracted by the pretty flowers up on the hillside or anything. You just want to keep focusing and get away from the predator. Now, where there's one wolf, there might be a whole pack. So that's why you get this generalized sense of threat, that there might be a problem round every corner. And overall, that gives you a greater sense of pessimism. It's like we're all doomed, that kind of feeling. So then contrast that with what happens when your brain perceives a source of reward. So it's like everything opens up. So your brain engages and goes into this mode of exploring. So you have more cognitive resources available to you. So whereas in threat mode, we're using the primitive parts of the brain, in reward mode, we're starting to use some of the higher parts of the brain. And that enables us to make connections between ideas, to have more insights. It gives us plans and ideas for action. It also means that because more of the brain is switched on, we're less likely to make the sort of perceptual errors that people can make when they're in threat mode. So we don't misinterpret things, we don't mishear, we look at things and we're clear about what we're looking at. And also what goes along with that is literally a wider field of view, as well as conceptually a wider field of view. Now, if I said to you, as a leader, which one of these two states do you want your people to be in? It's kind of blindingly obvious, isn't it, that you want them in reward mode. You want their brains switched on to explore, not to defend. And yet, I still meet leaders in all sorts of different organizations who think it's quite a good idea to threaten people a bit, keep them on their toes, they'll say. No, no. I mean, if you want people to do a good job, you want them in reward mode. So you could say that your single task as a leader is to keep your people in reward mode. And if you were to use that, as I said, as like a single lens through which to view your role as a leader, that simplifies everything. If you think, before you have a conversation with somebody, is what I'm about to do going to put them in threat mode, or is it going to put them in reward mode? And you're always in one or the other. And if the brain's not sure, it defaults to threat mode. And if you don't know for sure, assume there might be a threat. So we have to actively work to get into reward mode, whereas we'll go into threat mode, kind of almost without any effort whatsoever. So yeah, which one do you want your people in? You want them in reward mode. It's obvious, isn't it? Now, of course, there are times when you might have to pull somebody up on poor performance, or you might have to give them some news that they didn't really want about something that's changing in the organization. And so there are times when there's a danger that you will be putting people into threat mode. But at least if you know that that's the danger, you can prepare for it. At least if you have that in your head, okay, so I'm going to tell somebody something, there's going to be a change coming up or something that I think they won't like, then I can think carefully about how I set up the conversation so that it minimizes the amount of threat. Okay, all with me so far. Any questions? No? Okay. So let's move on then to the modern world, because for most of us in our daily lives, we're not actually physically in danger. Although, as I said to you in an email this morning, Dan, I imagine there's a lot of people in your organization now who are starting to think slightly differently about that. And people all over the Middle East who are thinking, yes, maybe there is an actual physical threat to me. So in the modern world, mostly threat and reward is social threat and reward. And I'm indebted to the work of David Rock from the Neuro Leadership Institute, who developed the SCARF model. And David Rock is not a neuroscientist, but he spent a lot of time interviewing neuroscientists, and he asked them simply, with all the research that's going on, all the wonderful things that you're discovering about how our brains work, tell me something that is practically useful, something I can do something with. And out of that has come a lot of really, really useful stuff. If you've not come across the Neuro Leadership Institute, then I would definitely recommend signing up for their newsletters and doing some of that. They do regular free webinars as well. And so the SCARF model is, as you can see on the slide there, it describes the social concerns that drive our behavior. So let's go through the five of them. So status is about relative importance. So the relative bit's important here. We don't necessarily need to feel that we are more important than everybody else, but most people benefit from feeling that they are as important as everybody else. And this shows up in things like, do people feel that their contribution is valued? Do they feel that they are respected for their skills and their position and the work that they do? Because if you start to feel that you're not valued and you're not respected, that's when your sense of status can diminish, and that's when the threat mode can kick in. Certainty then is about being able to predict the future, which of course we can't do. But we live with the illusion that we do. Every time you put something in your calendar, you're believing that you can predict the future. Yeah. So, I put today's webinar in my calendar and I predicted that that's what I would be doing today at this time. And most of the time, we do have enough control over our lives that we can put things in the calendar and they happen. But every now and again, something crops up that just makes it clear to us that there are always possibilities of things happening that we weren't expecting. So that illusion of certainty is really, really important. Autonomy then is about your sense of control over events. And a lot of people find this is a really key piece for them, that the idea that you have some choice about what you do and when you do it is really, really significant for a lot of people. A lot of people react very badly to too much management, or what a lot of people call micromanagement. Although I suspect what a lot of people call micromanagement isn't really as micro as it could be. It's just irritating because there's too much of it. And then relatedness. This is not just about making a connection with another person. This is about that sense of safety. It's about knowing that it's okay to be yourself. And of course, this is really where the DEI lobby come in, because they're working tirelessly to help people understand that if somebody doesn't really feel safe to be themselves, you're not going to get the best out of them. If you feel that some aspect of who you are isn't okay with other people around you, then your brain's going to go into threat mode, which makes it really hard for you to do a good job. So this is really, really important aspect of the model. And then the final piece is fairness. This is about perception of fair exchanges between people. I think this is quite a hard one because fairness is very subjective. And what one person thinks is fair, somebody else may think is very unfair. And if you don't believe me about that, just initiate conversation amongst your friends and colleagues about taxes and who should pay how much. And you'll soon find that people have very different views about what's fair. And I think most people would agree that equal isn't always fair. and therefore what is fair is very much open to debate. So those 5 things make up the SCARF model. And if you'd like to spend a bit of time thinking about that, I've got a giveaway for you this week. It is my ambition every week to give you something that you can take away and play with. And so I've got this little kind of inventory tool, which gives you a couple of questions for each of the elements of the SCARF model to help you reflect on what are the things that trigger you into reward and threat mode, because there'll be different things for different people. So, one person, for example, might have their status threatened if a colleague walks past them in the corridor and doesn't say hello. For somebody else, that might not bother them at all. But if they realize there's a meeting going on that they haven't been invited to, that might trigger the threat mode. So if you'd like to spend a bit of time just reflecting on what are the triggers for you, which are the most important elements of the model, then you can download my free SCARF inventory, which Mary will put the link to that into the chat box for me, so that you can download it later if you want to. So I think what all this boils down to is this. I love this quote from Robin Sharma. If you're struggling to place him, Robin Sharma is the man who wrote that wonderful book, The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. And he says the job of the leader is to create a workplace where it's safe to be human again. Now, I came across this a few years ago, and I was looking at it just a few weeks ago and thinking, I wonder what that means now in a workplace where a great deal of work is being done by AI. What does it mean to be human again? And I really, the more I think about it, the more I think that our human qualities are so important now that a lot of work can be done by AI, that what's driving that work and the intent behind it really has to stay in the hands of human beings, my opinion. Okay, let me just stop sharing. So, any questions about the SCARF model before I go on to the next piece? Okay. So what I want to do next then is I want to show you how the SCARF model connects to the leadership model that I showed you last week. As the leadership model came first, and I've been working with that for a while. And then I came across the SCARF model and the whole thing about reward and threat. And I started to think, oh, well, yeah, these are two separate things. And that never really sat comfortably with me. So I needed to work out how they interface with each other. And actually was really happy to discover that they do interface with each other very well. In fact, it's almost like they're saying the same thing from a slightly different perspective. So if the leadership model, you remember, came from asking people about leaders that they liked and respected and wanted to follow. So it's like, what do people want from their leader? And then the SCARF model is telling you more about what people need in the environment. So they sort of fit together. Anyway, they do actually create one coherent model if you choose to look at it in that way. So if I show you these slides. Okay. So there's the model. I don't think everybody saw that last week. And if you like a copy of it, then I can send you that. So if we then look at how the SCARF model sits on top of this, you start with status. So how do you give people a sense that they are valued and respected? How do you make them feel important? Well, on the one hand, we're using our influencing skills, we're engaging with people and building rapport. So, as a leader, just giving your time to somebody else to have a conversation with them can be enough to help them feel that they're valued and respected. But also, in the inspiration section of the model, the piece that I talked about, talent spotting, of highlighting people's talent, of noticing when they're excelling in something, pointing it out to them when they're doing a great job. That piece also goes a long way to helping people feel that they are valued. So those two things together, we're sort of in the others section of the model, are what creates that feeling of being important and maintains the status. Then if we go to certainty, Certainty really comes from two things. It comes from having a clear purpose. So, as a leader, when people know what you want from them, they know where they're headed, and they also can depend on you to be consistent. I'm sure you've all worked at some point in your career with or for somebody who constantly gave mixed messages, who would tell you something was important one day and then the next day tell you not to bother with it, or who would say something was important and keep saying it was important but never did anything about it. We've come across those people. And it isn't usually malicious, it's usually just lack of self-awareness and, inability to kind of organize and communicate and so on. But if you can do that, if you can be consistent in the way that you deal with people, you can be consistent with messages and you focus on a clear purpose, that creates certainty for people. And that's really, really helpful in maintaining, that explore frame of mind. Then autonomy really comes from the right-hand side of the model. So it's about giving people a clear direction and then letting them use their own skills to do the job and supporting their talent with coaching. I think you probably had experiences of this for yourself, that when somebody said to you, here's a task, this is the end result I want, I don't mind how you do it, that feels tremendously empowering. But when you say to somebody, here's the task and here's the 10 steps you need to go through in order to achieve it, for a lot of people, that takes away the motivation to engage in the task. It's like, there's no discovery here for me. There's nothing to learn. I'm just kind of, painting by numbers. And then if we go over to the left-hand side, then we've got the relatedness piece. So relatedness comes from, remember, people feeling safe with you. And one of the first things about that is being present. So your personal congruence means that when somebody is having a conversation with you, that they feel and they're really aware that you're giving them your full attention. Again, I'm sure you've had that experience where you go into somebody's office, you tap on the door, you say, "Have you got 5 minutes?" And they say, "Yeah, come in." And they're focusing, doing something on their desk, working on their keyboard, and you kind of hover and they kind of go, "Yeah, I'm listening, talk to me." Do you feel safe then to talk about with the most important things? No, of course you don't. So being fully present is one of the key things that makes the difference as to how safe people feel with you psychologically. And then also, it's just about spending the time. It's about making sure that you give people your time, that you pay attention to them, and that you actually experience for yourself the value of those people. Then they will experience that on the other side. And then finally, I think fairness comes from having an overview of what's going on in your team. So if you know who's doing what, you know what's working and what's not working, you know who's delivering the results, you know who's struggling a bit and you can give them some help, then that enables you to be really fair in how you deal with people so that you're not overloading somebody who's already under pressure, or you're not overstretching somebody's skills when they're still learning how to do something. And that will help to ensure that you are being fair. I know sometimes in a corporate situation, there might be things going on where you don't have enough say in it, and you might be the bearer of bad news. And sometimes you might feel that something's a bit unfair. But for everything that's under your control, then by maintaining your overview, you can ensure that you're dealing with your people fairly. Okay, so we're running out of time very rapidly here. So I've got one last piece that I wanted to share with you. Because all of this is great as a leader, as long as you yourself are in reward mode. Because as soon as you as a leader go into threat mode, it does tend to be catching. And I'm sure you can think of examples of people that you've worked with who, they're having a bad day, they share it around and make sure everybody has a bad day. So the other piece that's important, if you think about, your job as a leader is to keep everybody in reward mode. Everybody includes you. It's important you keep yourself in reward mode. I'm just going to give you a few ideas of things that you can do. And this is also something that you can, reflect on and take away, maybe discuss it with some of your colleagues and so on. So status, I think this is about how do I make myself important? Or how do I avoid disregarding my own importance? And I think this comes down to self-care. It's about making time and space in your day, in your week, for the things that kind of feed you as a person. So if it's really important to you that you get to the gym or you go out for a run or you do some yoga or you do your meditation or whatever it is, if that's important and that's part of you being at your best, you make sure that that always happens, even when the pressure's on, even when you're busy, because that's when you need it the most. And this can be anything. It could be time spent with the people that you care about the most. It could be, your bit of entertainment, whether that's, watching the TV, reading a book, whatever it is that helps you to feel like, yeah, I'm having a good day, then do it. Certainty is interesting because you can't always have certainty about the future, but you can create some certainty around things like routine and self-organization. So I remember this during lockdown. A lot of people were struggling with the lack of certainty because, we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know when the lockdown would end. And there were so many things that were unknown. And for a lot of people, I said to them, you can create a bit of certainty within your own environment. So, create a routine. So, you get up at a certain time, do certain things, have a routine about at what stage in the week you do certain types of work. Or whatever it is that sort of helps you to look at your calendar and kind of think, yes, I've got some control, I've got some certainty here. And if you're not a routine kind of person, then even self-organization will make a difference. So it might not be that you always want to do the same things at the same time in the same way, but if you plan to do those things and give them time and space, then that will help. And the personal organization, I've got a friend who regularly wastes time looking for her keys because she tends to lose them a lot. And I always say to her, like, I never lose my keys because my keys are only ever in one of four places. They're either in my hand, they're in the ignition of the car, they're in my handbag, or they're in the bowl on the table in the hall where I put them when I come in the house. They are never anywhere else. And she said to me, well, how do you do that? And I said, well, I just decided that that's where my keys live. If they're not in the car or in my hand, they're either in my handbag because I'm not at home, or they're in the bowl on the hall table. And so I never have to waste time wondering where my keys are. I always know where they are. That's certainty, right? And that helps keep your brain in reward mode. And I could wax lyrical about this. I spent years of my life teaching time management and personal organization, but I will move on. Autonomy. To keep yourself in reward mode, keep focusing on what's under your control. Yeah. Now, those of you that have NLP training, when we do the well-formed outcomes pattern, for an outcome to count as being well formed, it has to be under your control. If it's not under your control, then it's a non-starter. So some of you will have this habit ingrained, but if it's new to you, it's something that I definitely recommend you start to focus on. Think about what you can do, not what you can't do. Relatedness, then, I've said use second position. Again, this is a bit of NLP jargon. It's really about putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. So if there's somebody with whom you don't feel completely psychologically safe, if there's somebody who you feel is kind of judging you negatively for some kind of, spurious reason, then one of the things you can do is just kind of put yourself in their shoes. Imagine what it's like to be that person and see what you can figure out about why they might be a bit guarded with you, why they might seem to be critical of you. And sometimes just doing that helps to bridge the gap. Not always, but it's something that will help to keep you in reward mode because you're actively taking charge of what's going on in your mind and thinking about, well, is there a different way I can think about this? Is there some different insight? Which stops you just kind of going into threat mode. And finally, then, fairness. Stay at cause. And what that means is in the equation of cause and effect, mostly when people are unhappy and they go into threat mode, it's because they're on the effect end of the equation. So they're thinking something or someone has done something to me. I am on the receiving end. I'm the victim, if you like, and it's not fair is usually what comes out as a result of that. So if you can mentally move yourself round to the sort of cause end of the equation and accept that you are where you are and think about, okay, so what action do I want to take given the circumstances I find myself in? That will help to keep you in reward mode and stop you sliding off into threat mode. So you can probably add your own things to that, and I'd love you to send me your feedback about what you think you would add to that, because I'm sure there's lots of other things that people do for their own well-being. So I'm going to leave the slides there for today. Okay, so any questions, comments, thoughts? We have we have 3 minutes left.
I've got one question, Diane.
Yes,
I'm
Bruce.
wondering, I guess we've all got a boss, haven't we? There are not many people who's in charge of the whole world, unless it's Donald Trump, of course.
Yeah.
My question is if we actually put ourselves out to use the SCARF model and use your model, and we do everything we can in our resourcefulness to be at cause and to be in the reward side of the equation, what happens if our direct report, the person we report to, we find is consistently in threat mode? And however much we kind of second position them or attempt to relate to them as a decent human being, all we get back is kind of stuff that just doesn't make any sense at all and is coming from a very bad place. It's almost, for me, it's almost like a recipe for burnout, because if we attempt in that culture, to kind of be a good person, be the right person,
Yes,
we're going to end up kind of ripping ourselves to pieces.
you are describing a period of my own career, Bruce. And in fact, it was the point at which I was doing my NLP practitioner training, and I was working in an environment where I had a boss I didn't really respect. He was a nice man. He wasn't ever nasty, but I didn't have a lot of respect for him. He didn't really inspire me, and he wasn't really getting much done. And the organization was sort of staggering under the weight of a lot of history and a lot of ideas and processes that just weren't serving them. And actually, I remember on the last day of my NLP practitioner training, we were doing a lot of kind of, review, and we were working through, problems and so on. I remember kind of coming out the other side of a conversation with somebody and thinking, I don't actually have to do this to myself. It's not a failure to walk away and say, this is not the environment for me. Somebody else might come in and thrive in this environment, but it's just causing me stress. So I'm probably doing everybody a favor if I go and look for another job. So that was my solution.
Thank you, Diane.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to call it a day. Next week, we're going to be doing some work on strategic thinking. So that'll be the sort of top right of the model under the purpose category. And I'm going to introduce you to another bit of one of my favorite bits of NLP. Okay, so before we finish,